Georgina Brent. From the very outset, were you not personally hostile to Lieutenant Chambers?
I most certainly was not.
Why then did you call him a dirty blackguard and a liar?
I did nothing of the sort.
Not only did you call Lieutenant Chambers a dirty blackguard and a liar, you also told him, pack his bags, never put foot inside your hotel again. Outrageous!
Those are not words that I would use to guests staying at our hotel. I told him that if he had Father O'Donnell arrested, that he would never get a room in our hotel again.
No further questions.
You may step down, Miss Bennett. I now call on Father Captain Thomas Joseph O'Donnell to take the stand. Mr. Lynch.
Father O'Donnell, I'm sure, Reverend Father, that you're in no doubt aware as to the gravity and seriousness of the charges that are laid before you at this court-martial.
I am indeed, yes.
And how do you respond to these charges? Charges that fall nothing short of disloyalty to His Majesty and well-nigh treason to the Sovereign and the Empire.
I repudiate them outright. I repudiate them with every fibre of my being, and I do so with no little scorn.
Would you describe yourself as a loyal subject?
Emphatically.
And by what actions on your part would you feel that self-declaration of loyalty may be measured?
When the gallant sons of the Empire were beginning to fast forward before the final German offensive, I was first among the Catholic clergy in promoting military conscription.
And by what means, may I ask?
I undertook an interstate speaking tour.
What were your reasons for doing so?
Well, I felt with the stalemate on the Western Front that most of the Imperial Army was mainly made up of volunteers from a working class background, and that the business and rancher element had not been so generous in providing personnel to our army. I felt conscription was the fairest and most equal to all classes.
On the evening of the 10th of October last, you were engaged in conversation with Mr. Marsh at Killarney's International Hotel.
Yes, I was.
And in that conversation, was the name of His Majesty King George mentioned?
Numerous times, several times.
And I ask you, in what capacity was His Majesty mentioned?
Mostly in his role and connection to fixing the railway strike.
Were there any remarks of a demeaning or derogatory nature passed in that conversation in relation to the King, as has been described by Lieutenant Chambers?
Those claims are outrageous and preposterous, beyond belief. I am a loyal subject, loyal to King and loyal to Empire.
Would you also describe yourself as a nationalist?
I most certainly will call myself a nationalist, a proud citizen of fair Australia, proud to call my son of St. Patrick, the Emerald Isle, the land and birth that birthed my parents.
Would you describe yourself as a Republican? Do you advocate a 32-county republic with its own government seated in Dublin?
I would advocate nothing of the sort. I would not entertain such a notion for not even a fraction of 1 second. A republic? A 32-county republic? Who in their right mind would even consider such a notion?
What then is your political view as far as Ireland is concerned?
I believe passionately in a united Ireland, but one firmly embedded within our glorious empire and under the benign and paternal protection of His Majesty, our beloved King. I believe in home rule for Ireland.
Is it true to say that you were talking loudly at the table?
That is true. I had reason to raise my voice. My table companion that evening was rather hard of hearing.
Had you alcohol consumed?
I had a glass of light wine when I joined the local priest and directory earlier that day for lunch.
Scarcely enough to make a man 3/4 drunk.
No!
Enough to put a man in his cups.
That is the most scurrilous and the most hurtful thing that has ever been laid before me. Me, a priest ordained by the holy orders of the church. I stood side by side with my fellow soldiers in the Hindenburg line. In the face of deadly German artillery and rifle fire, I attended to the needs of the dying and the wounded. I put my own life on the line for king and country, and to come to the land of my forefathers and to be depicted as some kind of an out-of-control drunkard, well, that's beyond contempt.
I have no further questions.
I now call on Mr. Healy to give his closing statement for the defence.
Thank you, Madam President. I feel it is a great honour, as one whose relatives have fallen with the Australian forces, in appearing before a tribunal of Australian officers. But I deeply regret the illustration that the case affords, in the way of which men who crossed 10,000 miles of ocean have been treated at the hands of English officers. In the evidence of Lieutenant Chambers and the actions of the Assistant Provost Marshal, they have made a good character of those transactions that have reduced the country to the condition which it now happily lies. Captain O'Donnell came forward and rallied the forces of Australia. But in spite of his record, and that all the thanks he received from so many statesmen, the only reward in his own motherland was that he was passed about like a dog into a filthy cell on a base and unfounded accusation. Were it true that any language such as that suggested had been used by Captain O'Donnell, one would think that until at least he had been found guilty, he should have not been treated like a felon, cast into the Tower in a traitor's cell, sent from one prison to another in Dublin in filth and dirt. Even in Prussia, when priests were taken prisoner, some effort was made at recognising their rank and status, even by the Huns. What would they think of the condition of affairs which, on the mere word of a man such as Lieutenant Chambers, would submit a man of rank and experience to the treatment which Captain O'Donnell has received? Father O'Donnell had been attending on the day a religious retreat conducted by Jesuit missionaries from Dublin, and the priest with whom he afterwards dined would say that he was absolutely sober. The hotel books have been produced and show that during the entire time of his stay in Killarney, he never purchased a pennyworth of drink. He had also been seen just before the incident by Lord Kenmare. The suggestion that the reverend gentleman was not conducting himself with absolute propriety is almost, to a man of the cloth, as outrageous a suggestion that he is guilty of disloyalty to the sovereign with whom he has pledged and sworn to serve and support. At the dinner, Captain O'Donnell was spoken to by a Belfast traveller who, seeing he was Australian, was naturally interested. Captain O'Donnell had a conversation with Mr. Marsh at a table some distance away, but Mr. Marsh was hard of hearing, and so he sat down at Captain O'Donnell's table. The absurdity of supposing that Captain O'Donnell entertained a Northern Unionist with such balderdash. Madam President, there's no other word for it. As the Lieutenant Chambers has disposed, strikes anyone who knows as too ridiculous for words. The great railway strike was over, and as Mr. Marsh has told us, that so far from attacking the King, Captain O'Donnell said it was His Majesty's intervention which brought about the termination of the strike. So instead of finding fault, his language was language of laudation of the sovereign for having made the journey from Balmoral at great personal inconvenience to help settle the strike. Captain O'Donnell has confirmed that, so far from anything offensive, derogatory, or detrimental to the state or dignity of His Majesty King George, The words the accused uttered were words of praise and commendation. I submit that the story of Lieutenant Chambers writing down the conversation at the dinner table has been blown to smithereens. I ask you, why was the charge levelled at all at Captain O'Donnell? One would need to know something of the country to understand it. Lieutenant Chambers thought he was dealing with an Australian who, when arraigned, would say, "I refuse to answer and recognise this court. I condemn your jurisdiction." Now, at the inquiry, not one word about the notebook was let out by counsel for the prosecution. The story of writing the notes was an extraordinary incident, and if true, would be a most powerful piece of evidence. Now that it has failed, what are we to think of the rest of Lieutenant Chambers' testimony? As he never wrote one word at that table. The story of the notebook is a complete concoction. It was made up afterwards, and now has been made the tidbit of this present court. The existence of the notebook was brought out by the accused officer at the preliminary hearing. And by the truth or falsehood of that story, Lieutenant Chambers' conduct must be judged and the value of his evidence assessed. Mr. Waddell, who engaged the room at the hotel for Lieutenant Chambers, would not support the notebook theory, and he was sitting right beside him at the table in the hotel. None of the others in the room saw the lieutenant taking notes. The provost marshal, who was so indifferent to the fate of his prisoner, did not remember the notes when he wrote to Mr. Marsh, who would be an essential witness for Father O'Donnell. But no stone was left unturned to bolster and buttress the case. And why? Because the prosecution could not rely on Lieutenant Chambers' story. The lieutenant got the whole of the statement that was alleged to have been made by Father O'Donnell. There is no worse symptom of a witness than to profess to be able to repeat word for word by heart testimony which he tendered for acceptance. With the notebook go the notes, and with the notes go the whole case against Father O'Donnell without going into any evidence at all. I could have called for an acquittal without calling on Father O'Donnell to testify before this court. But that was not the stand that he wished to take. He wished to tell the court what the truth is, and wished to be placed under cross-examination as to his conduct on the 10th of October, when he is alleged to have produced the king, which is entirely foreign to either his mind or heart. I ask again, why was the charge levelled against Father O'Donnell? One has to know something of the country where the charge was made to understand it. Lieutenant Chambers thought he was dealing with some Irish Sinn Féiner or Australian Sinn Féiner who would refuse to produce evidence or even recognise the court. It was upon that basis that the charge was made. Every day in Ireland, men are sentenced at court-martial, and they refuse to recognise the court. But there is one thing, at all events, that must strike the court. Even when an ardent nationalist such as Father O'Donnell is, and a loyal subject as he equally is, they must repudiate with scorn the imputations he repudiates them that have been made against him. That repudiation alone should carry conviction to the court. Because at this moment in Ireland, where this charge originated, and whence this fetid atmosphere prevails, and whiffs of which have been borne here to Westminster, to this very court-martial, men boldly take their stand and say, I did advocate a republic. I did advocate the downfall of the empire. I did advocate the destruction of that empire, and I am ready to take the consequences. There are such men, and they have paid the penalty. Some with their lives, others by their liberty. But Father O'Donnell does not entertain such sentiments, and he seeks his vindication at the hands of his fellow Australian soldiers. He has sought this vindication not for any personal purpose, but to tear away the veil of hypocrisy which hides the conduct of the administration of government of the unfortunate island from which his father sprang. Captain O'Donnell's record as a soldier is well known to this court, and his record as an Australian patriot is well known to them also. Australians will hear much more of Father O'Donnell, Lieutenant Chambers, and the Provost Marshal. Father O'Donnell hopes that in his person and in the vindication which he seeks, he will have done something by his presence in Ireland, both as a priest and a soldier, to teach the people of England that a man of honour, loyalty and principle is not immune, unfortunately, from the tyrannical oppression that any British Army officer may decide to inflict on whomsoever he chooses as the inclination may take him. I thank you.